Uh, One of the things that we've learned from feedback that we've received from you over the years, over the year, is that you really would value a sense of a writing community, of companionship in your writing. And so we have devised a new program, a new thing called our Writers' Circle. If you sign up for it, you will be able to take part in 12 monthly sessions in which you can share a sample of your writing, get feedback from Joanne and me, and during which we will also answer any questions you have about featured aspects of your writing, problems that you face, challenges that you're meeting. And it's also an opportunity, of course, to get the applause of your fellow writers. Joining the Writers' Circle will also give you the key to an exclusive online library of writing resources. So we think it's quite a nice
Besides
thing.
that, you'll have a platform on which you can have a chance to share your writing and chat to the other writers at any stage. So you'll have that on an ongoing basis. Okay, and then the one course that, if I were to say that one course is essential, I would say our creative writing course, and I think we've proven that. We've had amazing results and responses from that, and enough people have said to us things like, it changed my life, it changed my way of looking at things. We're offering that in 3 ways to suit lives and learning styles. So we have the very exclusive version, which is real time and live. And that we do in the evenings. We only take up to 8 people. So there's lots of discussion, lots of personal attention, tons and tons of feedback over the weeks, Monday and Wednesday evenings for 5 weeks. And it's great fun. It really is lovely. That's a wonderful course to do, but it does fill up quickly since we only take up to 8. It's on early bird special at the moment, so there's a nice little discount on that one. You can also do it online, which is of course part of the Black Friday special, and we're offering that in 2 ways. So you can get a module a week, or you can get a module a month. For either 10 weeks or 10 months, depending on how busy your life is. So we're trying to help people, to do that course in a way that suits them.
We introduced our new Hero's Journey program a while ago, which has proven very successful not only in that people have enjoyed it, but that I think it is a very good program. It's an 8-part program. We meet once a week on Zoom. You get full feedback on assignments. The Hero's Journey, in my view, is without any question the most effective story template ever devised. So if you need help devising story, testing the strength of your story, the Hero's Journey is a fantastic program. Our mentoring program is something else that has been running now for some years. A number of you, I know, have already written books on it. You can sign up for different packages, different lengths of time, depending on your need. And then use us, Josie and me, for detailed and constructive feedback on your writing, for brainstorming, for intensive discussions with your fellow writers, because we also meet once a month online on Zoom for that, to discuss the problems you face, and the solutions that we suggest. Josie.
Okay. Yes. Then I was just trying to answer Anne-Marie's question in the chat box, and I lost attention briefly. What is really exciting me about next year, after 2 years of being tied down in one place, is we've got a load of real and in-person going away writing trips, all of which I'm excited by. There's Stow on the Wold, that's an annual offering in the village of Stow on the Wold, a weekend of writing and workshopping. Then we've got a new offering, the memoir weekend in Barrydale, the Karoo village of Barrydale, in the Karoo Art Hotel, with amazing food, wine, you know, birds to watch, you know, walks around the village. And that's with the two Joannes, Joanne, who is with us today, Joanne Hitchens, and me, and so we'll be focusing on memoir for that weekend. Then we've got another really exciting new trip, which we're hoping will become an annual thing. Tony Park, he's really a best-selling author, Australian. He writes about Africa a lot. We are going to a lodge in Zimbabwe, in the north of Hwange, and where there'll be, you know, a bit of workshopping, fabulous food, wine drinking, game drives, sitting, writing, overlooking a waterhole. So I think that sounds amazing. And then, of course, Venice, and we've got really loads and loads of queries about Venice. That's, as many of you know, been going for 6 years before COVID struck us. So we will be going back there next year. And yeah, so I actually can't wait. I can't wait for the almond tarts and the spritzes and the Proseccos and all of what we enjoy while we're there. Okay, yeah. And
all right, so just to underscore it, Black Friday ends at midnight. If you pay in full in advance, you get that full discount. You can shop either in our UK shop or our South African shop online, and you can use the coupon. We're going to put that up on the chat, in the chat room, in order to take advantage of the discount. We're also adding one final inducement, and that is anyone who makes a purchase on the Black Friday sale stands a chance of winning a place in our new Writers' Circle. Okay, let's move on now to the questions that you sent in. And this now turns into one of our regular webinars. The first question is one that I'm going to tackle from John Hoffmeyer. I saw you there a moment ago, John. You write, my protagonist changes from blameless to blameworthy through the course of the story. The inner conflict between honor and dishonor is driving him insane, literally. What are some ideas or techniques that I can use to hint that madness is taking control of his mind, rather than stating it bluntly? Well, your question, of course, goes to the very heart of the distinction between showing and telling. if you told your readers that your character was crazy, there would be no reason for us necessarily to believe you. By the way, I'm using the word very loosely. I realize that it is politically incorrect to call anyone crazy, and I'm not calling anyone crazy. I'm calling a fictional two-dimensional character in a book crazy, which is a different kettle of fish altogether. So what you want to do is not tell us he's crazy. You want to think of various ways in which you can show that he is slowly slipping away from reality. You want to show the slow deterioration of his personality or his increasing paranoid delusions. In other words, you would explore the symptoms of his condition in a series of scenes. And when you're quite right to use the word hint, for something as potentially obvious as full-blown madness, you don't want to go overboard. You want to be as restrained as you possibly can be in showing it. And I remember an example that we used sometimes in our creative writing course, not to demonstrate madness, but to demonstrate the beginnings of dementia. And it was an example we took from somewhere. I can't remember where it is. Josie, maybe you will.
No, I don't remember. But
where somebody appears at his front door to answer the bell. And the first time he appears, his belt has missed a loop. All right, so one missed loop doesn't make a summer, doesn't make a delusion. But the next time he appears at the front door, a day or two later, it's missed a couple of loops. And on the third occasion that we meet this character, his belt is cinched around his waist without any regard to the loops. Now, that might seem like a very small sign of something happening, of somebody taking care of his appearance, but it's enough for a reader to realize that something's amiss. And that, at the beginning of your story, John, is really all you want to suggest, is that something is going wrong. Now, of course, you will do some very serious research into what sorts of signs and symptoms would attend the particular mental malady that your character is suffering from. For myself, I personally favor paranoia, because we're all paranoid to some degree or other. It's a survival trait, after all. And so we would recognize yourself in your character, ourselves in your character, at least before the delusion became overwhelming. So less is more. Restraint is very good. The smallest signs will give all your readers all they need.
Don't forget that I always say readers are clever. They pick up the smallest nuances. You know, paranoia is rather nice, because at first your character can think that people are out to get him or watching him or whatever, and we might be, you know, we readers might be slightly confused about whether this is so. And then slowly we begin to realize that there are just too many of these, and his behavior becomes ever more extreme in the face of it. And we have to work out for ourselves that slowly over time, that perhaps it's paranoia rather than real reality-based fears. Okay, let's move on. So here's quite a complex one, and I'm going to have a bash at this one. So Cheryl, Cheryl asked, often writers switch between viewpoints during the narration, between characters themselves, and then sometimes back to the narrator. Some writers manage to do this successfully and others not. But I cannot pinpoint what makes these transitions during the story successful. What are the points to remember when doing this in a story? Well, what Cheryl is really talking about there, switching between characters and a narrator, is what's known as an omniscient, all-knowing narrator. And that kind of narrator who can swoop into the inner life, out of and between different characters, is, we would say, the hardest point of view to use well. It was, along with first person, the most commonly used point of view in the 19th and early 20th centuries, and then it became less common, less used. I won't go into great detail about the reasons for that. It's covered very fully in our creative writing course. But contemporary writers who use the omniscient point of view tend not to, or often don't, use an impartial, godlike narrator anymore, as they did in the 19th century, a sort of, godlike, all-knowing, a narrator who carries an overarching truth. Contemporary writers using an omniscient narrator tend to use a more partisan narrator with human biases. So, for example, Zekzemda once used the voice of the village as a kind of very human but omniscient view of a village. And others have used the voice of the neighborhood, a dead friend, many things like that. And I thought that we ought to mention Damon Galgot's The Promise. And his narrator has a sardonic, rather satirical voice with clear human preconceptions and prejudices. But he also has a kind of knowing ability to explain the foibles of his characters. He even reveals himself slightly to the reader. Every now and again, he says I to the readers, just showing that he's there. But for omniscience to work successfully, which is what you were really asking, you need a real literary reason to use it, because you want the effect created by it. Because, of course, it is possible to use third person without an omniscient narrator, by immersing yourself in the experience of one character in a scene or in a section, and showing the world through that character's consciousness and from their perspective. In this way, we gain a much closer identification with that perspective character. So if you choose not to use a more limited point of view, like that immersive third person or first person, you're choosing to use omniscient, you are drawing the reader away from your characters, and along with your narrator, allowing the reader to view them from afar. So, for example, Galgot chose this distance on purpose. He wants to show his characters from afar, almost as if we're studying them through a microscope. These kind of mean, grubbing, venal beings who scurrying around through that microscope. He wants to, in a way, mock them, comment on them. And as a result, we, or I certainly, hardly identify with the characters, but more with the narrator and his view of them. The reader becomes closer to the narrator almost, and further from the characters. His book is an allegory. He did that, he chose that point of view for a literary reason. So to use omniscience well, I think you need a strong sense of your narrator's voice. doesn't have to be a satirical narrator, but we need to feel him or her almost as a character. You also need to use the utmost discipline, because an omniscient narrator allows you to explain. If you're immersed in the consciousness, if you're closer inside the consciousness of a character, you simply can't explain, because your character is not thinking in explanations. So if you explain, it comes across very clunky. When you're using omniscience, you can, in a sense, explain. But should you? No, we would argue you need to resist that temptation with all of your being, because it's always better to show rather than tell. And I think too many would-be writers, and often some successfully published writers, use omniscience as a default in order to head hop and to tell rather than show. And this way, needlessly separating the reader from the characters and explaining far too much. In one or two places, even Galgut failed to resist the temptation to explain in a way that I felt he could have done without. Perhaps it's more tolerable to a foreign audience, but a couple of examples. He shows the domestic workers standing in the kitchen and people walking past her talking as though she is not there. And then he cannot resist his narrator saying, of course, at that time, Black people were invisible. White people did not see them. And, you know, I felt it was more powerful to allow us to see that for ourselves. And one more example I think is useful. Adormeni, the church minister, Adormeni, is being driven home by a worker from the farm of the family that is written about. And the Adormeni says, "What do you think about those people?" And he says, "I don't think, I just do." And but then he follows that by explaining, of course, this wasn't true. He did think, but he couldn't say so. And his desire he was in conflict between his need to please two different white men, and pleasing two different white men was never easy. I mean, in both these cases, I think the readers got the point and didn't perhaps need it bashed over the head. And in bashing it over the head, I think it also amounted to a teensy bit of virtue signaling. But that's my view. Anyway, I think that that's the problem with omniscience. It does tempt you. It's the devil. It tempts you into evil explaining. So my advice, don't use it as your default. Use it only when you particularly want that effect of the distanced narrator. And secondly, use a strong narrator, a strong voice, and don't explain. Okay, so that's what I've got to say on the subject.
We must say that discussions about point of view we thoroughly enjoy, because it has such a profound impact on the effects that your writing creates, the choice that you make about what point of view to use and how to wield it. Okay, Heather Joyce asks a couple of questions. She's asked an impossible question to begin with. There you are, Heather. Could the team suggest their personal non-negotiable classics that all aspiring readers should read, writers should read? So that's impossible to answer. We would prefer to say, read what you enjoy, but really remember to enjoy Middlemarch. Okay. I once met a professor of literature who was invited by what we now call, a civil society organization, to give a talk on reading and what parents should encourage their children to read. And he shocked the mothers in the audience, and I assume the fathers as well, by saying that they should encourage their children to read comics. I think his point was well made. It's less important to read specific books than to read many books. It doesn't really matter what you read as long as you're reading, particularly when you're young. You make the note, Heather, I only studied English to A level, and thereafter my reading of the great classics pretty much stopped. But I've always been an avid reader, so you, in fact, have been doing exactly what we recommend. It's just that I tend to go for more contemporary work. George Sanders' Swim in the Pond has been a revelation in terms of his writing advice, but I confess to finding it hard work plowing through some of the Russian short stories. Is there something wrong with me? Yes, obviously there's something wrong with you, Heather. You should all enjoy Chekhov. You should enjoy all of Dostoevsky, all of Tolstoy. You should read with pleasure the collected works of David Foster Wallace, Will Self.
Especially the Will Self that has absolutely no paragraphs through the entire book.
Well, it does.
Yes, I think I've had a go at that, actually. I did enjoy the Chekhov. I really loved Chekhov. It was some of the other stuff, and I just felt a major sense of imposter syndrome. I love George Saunders to bits, and I felt guilty for not enjoying the Russian stories enough, I suppose.
You know what? Don't ever feel guilty for not enjoying a particular book. Josie, you've got something to add to that.
Yes, I would also say I don't know if you made this point, but I'll make it again in case you didn't. When you start writing, write what you enjoy reading, because, that's the kind of thing you enjoy, and you're going to enjoy, writing that sort of work. I wouldn't dare suggest what books ought to be read. And I think read widely and sometimes beyond your comfort zone, which is what you were talking about. But if you, if you want to write a certain kind of book with, say, a different point of view or a memoir or biography, then read others like it so that you get a sense of those books. I can tell you what influenced me. Perhaps that would be interesting. In fact, in my PhD in the reflexive essay, I had to, look a little bit at the kind of works that had influenced me. And some things surprised me. But I realized that my mother, who wanted us to read and read us stories, had a copy of Oscar Wilde's children's stories, and she read those stories to me particularly, and I remember it, I was 4, and I remember it so clearly because she read me The Nightingale and the Rose, and I could not stop weeping. I sobbed and sobbed and sobbed and couldn't go to bed. And my father had to tell me 3 baboon stories. My father used to make up baboon stories about 3 little baboons, 2 boys and a girl, who were remarkably like us. And he had to tell me 3 baboon stories in order for me to go to sleep. But I can almost trace back that, I don't remember it, although it was so tragic, I don't remember it as being traumatic. And I can almost pinpoint that as being the time I wanted to be a writer. And in high school, we read The Go-Between, and we read Murder in the Cathedral and To Kill a Mockingbird. And all 3 of those books had a profound influence, particularly on my first book. When I look at the language used and the style of some of it, you know, I can see the influence of particularly the go-between and Murder in the Cathedral. So I think it depends what makes an impression on you personally, and that will have an impact on what you write.
I'm just going to pick up something that I remembered while you were talking, and that is when I was 7, my sister read me an incredibly inappropriate book. She read me 1984. And that also had a huge impact on me. I mean, it's quite wonderful how children respond to things, because I'm sure I didn't understand much of it, but something again about the language and the cadences and the wonder of it. So I think all children should be read something inappropriate to begin
with. Yes. So read little children the story of a bird pressing a thorn into its heart all night to bleed over a white impeccable rose for the sake of love, which then gets flung into the road and a cartwheel runs over it. Yes. Okay, so the next this was also Heather's. So she says, any thoughts on cancel culture and writing in voices very different to your own direct experience? Okay, I've always been slightly concerned by the logic of the argument that one shouldn't write beyond one's experience, because when you take it to its logical end, what it means in effect is that you can never write anything but memoir. And as a man, you don't have the experiences of a woman, or, you know, the powerlessness, you might say. And yet Roddy Doyle wrote a fabulous evocation of an abused woman and succeeded incredibly well. If you take it to its extreme, you can't write as a disabled person if you're able-bodied, or as a child in the modern world if you haven't experienced what children do and feel right now. I would say worry more about whether you can, not whether you may. Can you do it successfully? It's not easy. I struggle to write as a man in one of my books with different experiences from mine, but I wanted to do it and I took it very seriously and I put a hell of a lot of work into it. I did a great deal of research. I read and talked and struggled and talked some more and, you know, studied men in their natural habitat and listened to the way they spoke and thought and the way they expressed themselves. And I hope I got somewhere. I then made, you know, men read it to see if it rang true for them. Because there is nothing more irritating than someone who purports to write, say, from the perspective of an abused woman in Yemen, for example, and can't get a real sense of them, their experiences, or their sensibilities. I know that I become excruciatingly irritated when I read South African characters by foreign writers which don't ring true. So I can see that where the sensitivity comes from around speaking for others. You know, if you don't do it well, you do run the risk of offense or irritation if you don't get it right. But if you succeed, like Roddy Doyle, you know, yeah, I think that as writers, that's what we're there for. We're there to explore. And that's right, why I also don't see it as speaking for others, not just in my country, but anywhere in the world. Because I don't see writing as proclaiming or declaiming or being prescriptive. I see writing as an exploration, as an act of empathy and identification, stepping into someone else's shoes. And in the end, don't forget that we are all human and we do all share a common humanity. And I think that we should never forget that. We're not that different.
I'd like to add a little bit to that. When I read your question, Heather, I thought about Vasily Grossman, who's the author of a number of books about the Second World War, including Life and Fate and Stalingrad. He presumed that it was possible to inhabit the minds of Stalin and Hitler. He presumed that it was possible to inhabit the minds of people walking to their doom in the gas chambers. Now, these are kind of impossible things to imagine in a way, and yet he dared to do that, and he wrote amongst the most moving scenes that I have ever read by imagining himself into other people's heads. You know that there are writing prompts that urge writers to inhabit the mind of a bat and describe an evening's hunting. Well, that's probably cultural appropriation too, of a different kind. Or you can think of Iain M. Banks, who once wrote from the perspective of a sentient gas cloud on Jupiter. And, you know, if we can do that, we can do practically anything. I don't believe that we are stealing another culture's experiences. I think we're imagining them. And I think, as Josie says, that that expands possibility. It's not an insult. You also said something about well, let me read what you wrote. You're also fascinated by just how differently pretty much everyone under 30 views sexuality, gender, trans rights, and so on, with older feminists sometimes being vilified when they get it wrong, quote unquote wrong. Yeah, absolutely. But I don't think that there's that much distinction to be drawn between these issues, sexuality, gender, trans, and so on, and, for instance, clothes and music from a different culture or a different era. If you're going to write about something that is beyond your experience, you know, a young person's appreciation of sexual fluidity, I think that you have to research it, just as you would have to research the clothes and music of the 1940s, for instance, if you were setting a novel in that era. I suspect that a lot of us think that our particular culture and our particular history is in some sense exceptional. You know, like the Americans believe that America is exceptional. Well, I mean, I don't know that anyone else thinks that, but I think we're all guilty of it. I think we all think my problems are unique. They are exceptional. But as Josie says, you know, we all share a common humanity. Oh, and also because ours are so special, because our experience is so particular, that it needs somehow to be protected, like champagne needs to be protected from theft. But actually, everyone is unique. Everyone's culture is particular to them. And so I believe it can only enrich our common human experience to cross the boundaries and explore these further reaches of human experience. Okay, 2 questions came up from Frankie Francis, hello Frankie, and Ken Braun. Both of them, they were identical. How do I turn a book into a script? Excuse me. Okay, turning a book into a script. The really important thing to remember is that novels and screenplays are profoundly different animals. They are very different one from the other for two very important reasons. On the one hand, it's a question of point of view, what Josie was talking about earlier. Films cannot delve into the minds and the feelings, the thoughts and the feelings of characters, because as of today, we can't explore the inner reaches, human consciousness on the screen, right? So if you want to show what somebody's feeling on the screen, you have to either have them telling you, which quite often is impossible because frequently we don't tell other people about our feelings. We keep those feelings hidden. We keep them clasped close to our bosoms. So that's the one thing. The second thing is related, and that is that film is quintessentially a visual medium. Books are clearly not. In books, you can evoke all of the senses. You can delve, as I say, into the consciousnesses of your various characters. Many of them, if you like, as Damon Galgut did. I think he didn't meet a character without telling us what they were thinking and feeling. Screenplay writers have to, there's a lot of discipline involved in writing. Every time you come to something complex like a feeling or a thought, you have to show it. You have to devise a way of showing it. But more than that, you have to tell your story in images. You know, frequently people who are teachers of screenplay writing urge you to think of the story entirely in images and see if you can tell your story coherently without dialogue. Now, of course, you don't have to avoid dialogue when you're actually writing the screenplay. But the point of that is that you have to. So how do you turn a book into a film, into a screenplay? You regard the book, you regard the story that you've already told, or the book that you are translating into film as raw material. Raw material that you will mine for your story, for your screenplay. Josie and I actually turned her first book, The Innocence of Roast Chicken, into a screenplay. And we had to do quite a lot of fairly radical adjusting. I'm not going to go into the details because we're going to run out of time, in order to make it work on the screen. But it can be done. Almost all books can be turned into screenplays. Not always equally successfully, however. I would suggest that anyone wanting to do this reads one of the books available through Amazon, if you want to get them quickly, on adapting novels for screenplays. There are two that I picked out. Adapting Novel to Screenplay by Steve Alcorn and Danny Alcorn, where they talked in great detail about the process of adapting one of his novels, one of Steve Alcorn's novels, into a screenplay. And a second book, which was also about the adaptation of two specific books in fact by Stephen King, and Salem's Lot and Carrie, and The Shining. So 3 films. That book is called Adapting Stephen King, Volume 1, by a man called Joseph Maddrey, Maddrey. Okay, we are going to be running out of time quite soon. So Josie, can you?
Yes. Go on to the next question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So Ank asked a question: can I combine truth with fiction? If I had an experience I want to use, can I write in the third person and make up names even though it's a true story? And the short answer to that is yes. Absolutely. I do not think there's a novelist in the world who doesn't do this. And just as a little example, my partner and I, my partner who is a nonfiction writer, and I used to have, when we lived in Johannesburg, we had a tiny little house in the village, farming village in the Free State of Vrede, meaning peace, which wasn't quite as peaceful as its name made out. But I was busy writing The Imagined Child, my novel, and he was busy writing a non-fiction book for the Dutch market called about the Afrikaners. And Fred and I don't discuss our books while we're writing because it's just too painful. And then when we both finished, we realized that we had both used Vrede at length in our books, but he in nonfiction and me in fiction. So in my version, I could twist things, I could change them slightly, I could change them for dramatic effect. He couldn't. He had to stick to what really, really happened. But the funny thing was that I had something happen, which I can't tell you because it's a kind of spoiler, but a kind of denouement at the end of my book that happened, which seemed like something that might happen in a place like Vrede. And Fred and I used to sometimes at book fairs give a talk where we spoke about the town and how we used incidents and funny anecdotes and how I used them in fiction and he used them in non-fiction. And somebody who had sort of escaped peace, escaped Vrede, came up to us afterwards and said, who told you about that terrible thing that happened that you've used at the end of your book? And I said, oh no, that part I made up. She said, no, but it happened. So, all novelists twist and plait real and imagined together to form a dramatic story. But always remember that there's an implicit contract. If you say your book is nonfiction, you can reconstruct real life, but you can't manipulate or change it. But in fiction, you can use real life, change it, manipulate it, add for drama. And in that case, we often say, don't get stuck in the trap of what really happened. Allow it to be organic. Use it, but change it if it suits your characters in the story.
Yeah.
Okay, and then a quick one. She asks about an ideal length for a chapter in a novel. No, a chapter must end where it feels right. Perhaps it closes something off and makes us long for the next one. Some writers deliberately use short chapters to make us go on reading, because if a chapter ends very quickly, you're almost, compelled to turn the page and read the next one. And a novel on average, I suppose, is anything from 70 to 95,000. Obviously, there are books that are longer, but I think a publisher might balk at a first-time novelist bringing in 120,000, unless it's a clear humdinger or totally brilliant. It costs them, there are practicalities there. It costs much more the longer the manuscript. So maybe aim at 80, 85. But, you know, if you fall short or you run over, that's also fine. Okay. Richard, you muted.
Muted. I was muted. Quick answers to Georgia's questions. She says, how long should I leave a finished first draft before going back to edit it and make changes? My glib answer is 28 days. In other words, as long as you like. Okay, I don't think there's any ideal length of time. How long did you leave yours, Josie?
I try to go quite quickly back. What I do is I leave it a week during which I celebrate. Then I print it out and go through the printed pages, but I'll talk about that. And so, because if you leave it too long, you start to dread it and you can't get back to it. So a week, 2 weeks, you know.
Your third question is, when it is as polished and ready as it can be, how should I approach agents for publishing? And the simple answer to that is read what the agents say on the websites and then follow those instructions to the letter. They don't appreciate people avoiding their recommendations. Do you your fourth question, do you recommend starting work immediately on something else after finishing a manuscript? And the glib answer is yes and no. Some people, of course, are writing more than one thing at a time. So again, I don't think there can be an ideal recommendation for this. It all depends on you.
And sometimes you have to get your characters out of your head a little bit, and because you embody them so completely, you know, sometimes you have to just allow them to get out of you and then climb into another. Okay, quickly, our last question, and I think I can do it in a minute or two. It follows on the last question. She says, what would you recommend looking out for when editing your own stories or working on draft 2? Well, I would say everything. So I would say print the whole thing out, read it through for the flow of the entire thing, and scribble notes. Scribble notes in the margins, make notes of things you must look at when you take it back onto the computer, when you work on the computer again. Think about your overall arc, the journey your character undertakes from beginning to end. What does your character want going into the story? What does she face? Where does she end up? Does this follow through your manuscript, or do you get lost in tangents somewhere along the line? Does it work? Then look at every scene, and what is every scene? Look at what your character wants going into the scene, even if it's a glass of water or a wee, and what does she face, and how does she come out at the end of the scene, and how does that scene carry the story forward and show us more about the character. I quite like using index cards at that stage, and on these index cards I put little blobs, and I put a 1 or 2 sentence description of what happens in every scene. Joan meets Michael for the first time, hates him on sight. If you cannot write in 1 sentence what your scene is about, it's not a scene and you've got a big problem. Then you must go and, you know, look at it. The other things you need to look for: look at your dialogue, read it aloud, see if it sounds real, see if you're using your dialogue as an excuse to explain things. And also look for great blobs of explanation. And if you've got them, excise them and look for ways to drip feed through those scenes, you know, the little hints about backstory that you don't want to explain in a great info lump. The last thing she asks is, what makes descriptions of the environment around the character come alive, especially when set in nature? I would say be specific, not a hint of generic. Beautiful, charming, picturesque, cut them out. show us specifically what we're looking at. Use all your senses. Don't neglect sound and smell. Strong verbs and nouns. Limit the adjectives, cut the adverbs. Use only what you need and no more. And what you do need must be related to your character. What would she notice, being the person she is and the mood she's in, the state of mind she's in? So your description, or I prefer to talk about detail, because description tends to make you think about flowery, long bits. Detail, use what's needed, but it should ideally serve a purpose larger than simply allowing us to visualize the environment. It shows more about your character and how she's feeling. Okay.
There was one final question that I'm going to answer in 2 sentences. Because Michelle asked, what publications accept short story submissions from unagented writers? Well, number one, I would urge you to ask Mr. Google. I would urge you to think about subscribing to a magazine like this, which frequently contains recommendations about the sorts of magazines, publications, and competitions that accept short stories. I mean, this particular issue has 803 competitions for short stories listed. Very useful. And then finally, of course, the Artists and Writers Handbook, I think, also has a list of publications that accept short stories from unagented writers. Okay, that's it. We've covered all of, and we are 3 minutes over time. And we have got one final bit of business.
The prizes. And while we're pulling up the wheel to draw the prizes, did anybody have anything they wanted to ask about our courses, programs, trips, anything like that? And while you're doing that, Trish will pull up the wheel. Okay, all right. It doesn't seem like anyone wants to ask anything. All right, so there are all your names.
Well, all of your email addresses rather than your names.
Yes.
And Josie, tell us what the first person is going to win.
Oh, yes. The first person is going to win our 30-day boot camp. That's right, isn't it, Trish? Yeah, writing boot camp. And this is intended to inspire you as every day, a small a page or so of writing advice and a prompt that carries you through certain skills of writing and helps you practice and develop your discipline.
Okay, so
we would like, we sort of feel it's more fun if people are here, so we'll have a couple of goes. Peter, I didn't see a Peter. Peter, are you here? Yell if you are. Okay, I think it's not so much fun if the person isn't here. But if we go on and on and on, we might have to. Okay.
That's me.
Jen? Oh, are you here? Yeah. Okay, that's fantastic. So you will get an email which gives you the code or whatever you need to get into that online course. But congratulations. I hope you really enjoy it.
Thank you. This is amazing.
Okay, good. And the second person will get our online indispensable guide to creative writing, which gives you a video clip each day, some bullet points of writing advice, and also a prompt that entrenches the skills that are contained in that clip and the bullet points. Nina, Imp Writings. Is Nina here? I don't think so.
No, spin it again, Trish.
Spin again. Ah, Stefan. I saw Stefan.
Yes, Stefan.
There we are. Woo! Okay, congratulations. Oh, his mic is broken, but brilliant. That's wonderful. So there you are, our 2 prize winners. And I hope everybody else who's wanting to do things will make use of our big discounts and things. We've tried our best. Yeah, 50% is a lot. So there you are. Yeah.
What?
What's that?
Pooley asks if what can be repeated? Oh, all right.
Something happened in the beginning. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Pooley.
Yeah, I got sidetracked. I had factors in my head, so
No, we will repeat.
Couldn't hear the whole how to access the
Black Friday.
Yes, yes. And
okay, there it is.
I mean, there are a few hours left. So
there you are, Pooley. So there you are in the chat. So you go, online onto our website. You look for the course, the online course that you want, and you put in that coupon code, and it will give you the discount. There it's sitting in the chat, so you can just copy it. Copy that, yeah.
Okay.
And there are the links to the shop as well.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Pooley. Lovely to see you.
And that brings us to the end of our last webinar of the year.
So have a great end of year. Lovely holidays if you take holidays. And yes, I hope you get some writing done and get lots of presents.